Since you've done the interdiction for nearly 3 decades and you do training, what's the difference between interdicting smugglers and interdicting terrorists?
That's actually a really good question, because, and I'll preface it by saying this: there's a lot of training out there that put in their name that they're interdiction for, let's say, it says like criminal and terrorist interdiction, and some of it is valid because, especially now with the new administration, when the cartels have been deemed a designated terrorist organization by the State Department and the U.S. government. So it is kind of by definition terrorism, right? Like terrorism interdiction.
Yeah.
But from an actual foreign terrorist organization, right, a FTO, the focus when we talk about terrorism, not related to the cartel, we're talking about groups like ISIS,
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda, 9/11 hijackers.
Sure.
Okay, those are the kind of terrorists. We're not talking about people who are just doing terrorizing by definition, right? Because that's true, because absolutely the cartel are a terrorist because they terrorize as a method of control and manipulation and fear. We're talking about extremist ideology. So when it comes to actual terrorism interdiction, it really depends on what are we focusing on here. Are we talking about cartel, moving weapons, that type of terrorism interdiction? Or are we talking about an officer working the interstate looking for smugglers and criminals in transit, be able to identify someone who possesses the ideology that would align with groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and things like that?
Okay.
So because that is totally different. The set of indicators, okay, and the applicability of suspicious behaviors and activities that as smugglers engaged in is not even the same as, let's say, a terrorist who's in transit. Because a terrorist who has extremist ideology, there's by definition, it's the ideology. There's no external indication, right?
Okay.
So it requires someone to be able to formulate questions, to be able to test where they stand when it comes to certain beliefs. Okay, now, a lot of it has to do with politics, international politics. A large amount of it has to do with religious beliefs, right?
Okay.
And I'm not saying this in a way to say that every officer should learn and then every time they stop somebody, start asking them a question about religion.
Well, sure.
But if you understand the way the terrorist organizations work, where those two elements are kind of co-joined in their ideology, and they use that for developing that hatred towards Western society. Okay, it's part politics and it's part an adulterated interpretation of the text.
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both, right? For someone who is, let's say, an interstate interdiction officer, or just even a patrol guy, right, who is actually a proactive person, if they're engaged in interdiction, they're totally missing that part, because the typical things that you hear in interdiction schools, like a single key in the ignition, air fresheners, lived-in look, not enough luggage, Red Bull drinks, and all these physical indicators like, La Santa Muerte, Jesus Malverde, and, rosary beads, and all this other stuff doesn't apply. Because these are things that are related to a specific demographics, if that makes sense, right? Because it is. I mean, this is because these are common denominators that were developed over years based on previous drug seizures and catching smugglers, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to ideology, those things don't apply, right? Number one. Number two, there's another element, and I teach this in my Smugglers in class that's focused only on smugglers, is the presence of clandestine activity and countermeasures, which becomes part of their tradecraft to maintain the clandestine edge, right?
Okay.
So I do teach a class, or used to. I don't do it anymore because my focus has now gone into, teaching the terrorism aspect of it, because I come from that background.
Well,
right?
yeah.
I grew up overseas. I was trained by one of the notorious terror organizations to be a child soldier. So I've gone through the indoctrination process, and I've spent, nearly 35 years studying even other groups and what they stand for. But in the Smugglers in class that now I have instructors that go out and teach it, it's based on tradecraft and how a illicit business operates, and they have to put countermeasures in place to prevent being identified by law enforcement, right? That's not the same as when you're trying to detect if someone has an extremist ideology that's aligned with, extremist group like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and things like that. Because what they're hiding is in their head. Yeah. It's nothing physical. The activity doesn't take place until they're moving on their attack.
Sure.
The conversations, the planning, all of that happens by just talks, right?
Okay.
A smuggler has to pick up a car loaded with dope and drive it somewhere else. A terrorist, until he picks up the weapon or goes and sets off a bomb somewhere, if he's driving, he doesn't have anything with him. So even the fear-based responses that you look for in a interdiction traffic stop, that's typically with someone having fear of consequence of having some drugs with them because they're going to prison, that won't be there when you're speaking to someone who possesses the ideology to go kill a bunch of people. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, the one person who's smuggling is fearful because of the fact they're going to be discovered. Yeah. The other person has no fear because it's his conviction to go kill the people.
They would appear innocent, no?
Yeah, and they're going to be calm. I have the actual audio recording of the guy who did the January 1st attacks, and it was the phone call that he made to his family as he was driving to New Orleans. And literally, you listen to him, this guy is calm. Like he knows, he says that he's going to be martyred.
Wow.
So he's going to his death. So he has no fear. So if he was stopped by an interdiction officer on Interstate 10, he would exhibit no behaviors that are associated with fear of discovery and fear-based response, and he wouldn't lie. The only thing he would omit was his intent for going to New Orleans. Okay. But that would be because it was his conviction. Yeah. Right? His story was, I'm going to New Orleans. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that. There would be no hiding anything. Yeah. Now, there would be an element where if the officer would want to search his car, he would probably run into a problem because obviously he's carrying explosive materials and stuff. Sure, yeah. Right? But a lot of interdiction officers are trained, most interdiction officers are trained that you don't get to the search part until you've established that this car is actually of interest based on the interaction you have with people, right? You pick up on the deception, on the anxiety, on the fear-based response, on the especially if somebody's working interdiction, on the tradecraft, on if they've been to my class where I talk about clandestine activity. When those things are not present, when they're stopping this guy, someone who possesses the same ideology as he does, they wouldn't even take it to that step of wanting to search his car. Wow. You see what I'm saying? So the guy would drive down the road, and the poor guy, the interdiction guy's like, well, we'll go stop another car. Yep. And then 2 days later, he's getting a call by the FBI going, hey, you stopped this guy? Yeah. You got a video of it? Yeah. What did he say? Well, he just said he was going to New Orleans. Yeah. And then they go, well, yeah, he just went over there and killed all these people. What do you think that officer's going to think? Oh, shit.
Wow, I could have stopped that.
I could have stopped that. Yep. And why is it? Because that type of training is not there. That's why me growing up in the Middle East and having gone through it, and I see it all the time. Law enforcement focus always, after shit hits the fan, is how do we respond to it? Yeah. It's never how the fuck do we prevent it? Yeah. Right? You know what I'm saying? That could that attack, if the guy would have been stopped, and the 9/11 attack could have been prevented if the guy up north would have known about this. You can't really blame the officer for not knowing.
Well, sure, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because they're only able to go to training that their department allows them to go, right? Mm-hmm. In this particular scenario, there is no training like that. So interdicting a terrorist in transit is not the same as interdicting a smuggler, regardless of what the title of the class says. Okay, and the one thing people need to realize, just because a class says terrorism interdiction and we have this threat of terrorism going on, don't expect to go to these classes and learn how to ask somebody which branch of Islam they belong to and what their ideology and interpretation of the end of times is, because those are the knowledge that someone needs in order to determine, am I dealing with a cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs here? You know what I'm saying? And none of those people who teach us are qualified to do it. You know what I'm saying? And you could actually ask them how many branches of Islam there are. They're like Shiite and Sunni. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And don't even know how to say it. Yeah. Right? And I'm not trying to take anything from them.
Well, sure.
But it is a type of information that U.S. law enforcement has never had to encounter. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bridge that gap by providing that training and make these interdiction officers be aware. Be aware of the fact that, hey, just because your certificate says criminal and terrorism interdiction, that doesn't mean when you stop a sleeper cell from Al Qaeda or Taliban.
Yeah.
That you're going to be able to pick it out, because whatever you're looking for when it comes to smugglers, it ain't going to be there.
Sure. You're
It
trying
ain't
to be
gonna
that missing puzzle
You're going to
piece.
walk away going, wow, what a nice guy.
For sure.
Right? And then you go, holy shit. When you find out he killed somebody, a bunch of people, you're like, damn, I'm an idiot.
Yep.
Right? And that's what I'm trying to prevent, right? The reality is, since this training has never existed, people are kind of like, well, I don't know what it is. It's almost like they're afraid to go to it. And then you have the administration to go, that's not our problem, by God. That's the damn FBI. That's what they get paid to do. Well, I've never seen an FBI guy up on the interstate with a patrol car making traffic stops.
For sure.
You see what I'm saying? So it does fall on the first responders.
Yeah.
Right? And that's, so to answer your question after this long explanation of what's the difference, there's a lot. It's a whole entire different animal. The term interdiction means interception. What you're interdicting or trying to intercept, the dynamics are totally different.
Well, yeah, and let me ask you, do you think since this training has never been available, do you think that these people, since they know no better, you can't even really blame them or fault them for what's going on here? I mean,
exactly.
They don't know any better, so therefore you can't even really hate the person or have any animosity towards them because
it's not the officer's fault. And to be honest with you, it's not even the administrator's fault. This is a dynamic and a situation that law enforcement hasn't had to deal with to this magnitude.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, what the fuck? They don't know what to do.
It's a shock factor.
And the first thing you do in law enforcement, and I'll tell you because I've been supervisor and I've, hung around with a lot of supervision, they're like, well, that's where plausible deniability comes in, where they go, well, it's not really our job. That's what Homeland Security and FBI is for. When in reality, it is your job.
Yeah.
So because they don't know and they don't know how to resolve it, they just fall back on the statement that, well, as long as we're not the one tasked with it and solely responsible, we could say it's somebody else's fault, so we're not liable.
Sure.
You know? But the reality is, supposed to save lives.
Yeah.
Who gives a shit whose responsibility it is?
For sure.
Anybody from your patrol guy that works a small town police department to your, FBI special agent in charge, everybody has the same goal, right?
Yep.
The foundational goal of law enforcement is to save lives.
For sure.
Right? Forget this, shaking hands, kissing babies shit. That's politics, right? At the end of the day, an FBI agent, a sheriff's deputy, a narcotics agent, an interdiction officer, a patrol officer, once they stop someone and they let them go because they didn't know, not of the fault of their own, but they weren't educated on it, and that person goes and kills someone, how do you think they're going to live with themselves for the rest of their life? Unless they're pure narcissists and megalomaniacs, there is going to affect them. It's going to have PTSD because they'll be sleeping going, if I would have only known how to fucking ask questions,
you could have saved
this
all these
shit
lives.
would have never happened and all these poor kids wouldn't have been dead.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying?
And you're trying to be that missing puzzle piece.
Exactly. So the training is there, but there's a big, huge difference between smuggling interdiction training versus terrorism interdiction training.